it's been really nice to flip between it, and that's so great. I know some people do both. It's becoming a bit rarer and rarer.
People tend to either want to focus on birth or focus on postpartum.
Yes. Yeah. I think maybe because of my naturopathy work, where I see people for fertility, like hormonal concerns or general health concerns in the lead up to them wanting to conceive, and then I'm the naturopath through their pregnancy. I just love the continuity across the whole spectrum. It's my complete bread and butter.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I'm Jess. We're here with Larissa.
Hello.
And we have the wonderful Vaughne Geary joining us today as well.
Thanks for having me, ladies.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for coming. So obviously I know your story like the back of my hand. I could tell it myself even if you weren't here. But for anyone who's listening, and for Larissa as well, we would love to know a little bit about, most of our guests, actually all of the guests we've had so far are parents, and you're not. And I find it really interesting when someone enters the postpartum world without having gone through parenthood themselves. I've always said it takes a really special person to have that level of empathy for those who have gone through it. So do you want to start with telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to this very point?
Absolutely. Yes, it's a rarity, I think. I honestly think I'm one of the last people in our sort of close-knit community that hasn't had a baby. Jolene, lactation consultant, just had her bub.
Yes.
So it's I'm one of the last. But it's been a pretty amazing journey. It's taken a long, long time to get to this point. I didn't, as a child, I never knew that I wanted to work with women and babies. I didn't have lots of women in my life and cousins and people around in that perspective. But it was really when I had hit a bit of rock bottom with my own health in my 20s, as my mum would say, I burnt the candle at both ends.
Oh, yeah.
As
Find
a
me a
teen.
20-year-old who doesn't, though,
Yeah.
honestly. I'm truly surprised I lived through my 20s.
Ditto. But survived, I obviously started studying actually years ago. I did a journalism degree, so I wasn't remotely on the health trajectory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was, I thought I wanted to do it and loved it until I didn't love it. So halfway through my final year, just thought this is not what I want to be doing. I don't want to be talking about people. I want to be helping people rather than writing the stories about people. And I was just, after all my partying and living out of home for a few years, I was feeling really terrible and had seen a few doctors over time and just wasn't getting answers. I'd been on the pill and I'd fluctuated hugely in my weight and mental health because of that. And I just felt like there was something else out there. And I grew up on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, which is pretty alternative. It's a beautiful, amazing area. Like I grew up on acreage in the hinterland, so I was constantly surrounded by all of the natural therapies and had dabbled in it and read some books and things, but it took me really getting to my lowest part of my health to kind of really reassess what I wanted to do in life. And I randomly moved home, had a bit of a breakdown to break through, moved home and started a job at like a natural health food store on the Sunshine Coast. And I had this amazing naturopath that took me under her wing. She's always seemed in like her 80s or 90s, but I think she was probably in her 70s at the time, Grace. And she mentored me, which was incredible. So she took me under her wing in the dispensary and I started learning all the names of herbs. And from there I was like, should I study naturopathy? And I started to heal from my, reproductive issues, my weird missing periods, my acne.
From taking the herbs under her direction.
Yeah, from shifting just my lifestyle, from taking herbs, getting off the pill, I think just sorting my nervous system out as well, starting to have a bit of a healing journey with myself. And signed up for naturopathy. So that off the back of another degree, I went slow and steady. It was trying to teach myself as well science, which just was not my forte. I went to a very strangely religious school, not because my parents are religious. Yeah, on the sunny coast, there's a lot of quite like Hillsong churches.
Right.
And the science that I was taught there was biblical based rather than what I believe to be science based. Yeah, yeah. So the world didn't exist millions of years ago, basically. So yeah, I had to go back to foundations of biology and chemistry and anatomy and all of that. And I also didn't, I sit where I am today and can tell you about cycles back to front, but our sex education as well was taught by a virgin. Like we knew that the teacher hadn't experienced anything himself, and it was just a funny space to have landed in my early 20s, feeling so disconnected from my body and what it was doing and why. And so started naturopathy though, and that was just an incredible healing journey. And I moved to Melbourne partway through that, off the back of a really intense year in my life. I actually fell pregnant with an ex-partner. I found out about 2 weeks after I'd broken up with him. I knew that I wanted to move to Melbourne. And so living in Queensland, where abortions were also illegal, had to try and find out where I could do that. And there were actually people out the front of the abortion clinic on the day that I went that had signs against it, which was, I knew in myself that it was absolutely what I needed to do at the time. I was a uni student on government support, living in a share house. But strange to think that now I could have like a 9-year-old child off the back of that. So I think that really kicked, and shifted the gear of me really thinking about reproductive health and my own experience in the medical setting. I think I just had really bad luck with the people that facilitated me getting the abortion, and the doctor that I saw sort of was in complete shock and horror that I'd actually had an abortion. And
I don't think you got unlucky. I think that's quite standard, which is sad.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. I know a lot of people that are, and
the same experience. Yeah, it's very rare to be supported through an abortion or a termination or an early birth.
Absolutely. It was, I went in alone. I didn't go in with my partner, who was now my ex-partner. I went with my best friend, and the conversation was just immediately around, okay, look, great, we'll set you up for scans, we'll get you on Elevate, and you'll go on your merry way. And I broke down in tears, and he had no ability to hold that space for me. And I just sort of left feeling really, alone. I had my best friend who came with me to the scan, and lying there on the bed, seeing a heartbeat. And even then the technician was sort of like, oh my gosh, there's your baby. It'll be due in May next year. And it was just kind of blow after blow, and such lack of acknowledgement for the fact that there's such a kaleidoscope of people going through a range of experiences, and not every pregnancy is wanted for a number of reasons. So that was where my eyes opened very widely, and I think the veil kind of dropped, and an innocence, was lost in some sense. But I'm really glad, and to this day I stand by, and I'm so glad that I did what I did, because I wouldn't have packed up and moved to Melbourne and kickstarted kind of this independent journey that has led me here
to where you are. And you're also a full spectrum doula?
Yes. Yeah, correct. So while I was studying naturopathy, I was just hating the science for the reasons explained previously. And I was doing it part-time. I was working a little bit, but I was just craving working with women, especially going through something like I had gone through. And this is it was late 2015 when I was sort of looking into this, and that's crazy, it's nearly 10 years ago, but there was so little information about doulas. There wasn't the boom that's kind of happened in recent years, which has been amazing. But I was wading through information, and I actually found out about abortion doulas in America before I found out about birth doulas. Yeah, so I sort of thought, look, I'd love to do something like that, facilitate. I would love to be there with people during their pregnancy, during their labour, postpartum, just because I'd experienced and I could see from knowing friends and family that had also had their own experience, and hearing the horror stories of lack of continuity and bedside manner and all of that. I was like, I feel like I want to work in a space where I can be there emotionally and physically in a way that a lot of the more mainstream medical professionals can't be. So stumbled upon doula work. And
do you think, Vaughne, that was sort of a very cathartic process for yourself in healing from what you had also been through?
Hugely. Yeah, hugely. I think it's a culmination of absolutely what I'd been through with my abortion. I come from a very broken lineage of women in my family. Like, my mum was abandoned by her mum when she was a teenager. She was an only child. On my dad's side, it's quite broken. So I've never had that feminine energy. My mum's incredible, and she's been completely shifting the narrative of how she was raised and mothered, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But you still feel that, you know, it's sort of, you still hold so much energetics and past of your family. So I felt that very deeply. So I think it was like a craving for connection. I was finding my own way. I'd landed in naturopathy, and then I'd had my experience of my own reproductive health issues and the abortion. And so it all just kind of landed in one. Like, I would have never planned that they all came together, but it made sense that I really wanted to focus on women's health across the spectrum.
Yeah.
So, I signed up for a doula course with the Australian Doula College early 2016. My best friend and I were living together at the time, and the same week I signed up to do my doula course, she found out she was pregnant with a baby. Bit of an accident, but Edie's
so
the
this
greatest
is when you
blessing.
were in Melbourne. You had moved to Melbourne by this stage. Yep.
Yeah, had moved to Melbourne, and it had just been a tumultuous few years. I'd had the abortion. My best friend had killed himself the year prior when I moved to Melbourne. It was like I was going through an absolute just breakthrough metamorphosis of kind of what I wanted and needed. I felt like I learnt a lot and grew a lot in
a really small
in a
space
very small space. Yeah. And living here away from family, I had some good friends, but I was still trying to set myself up and establish myself here. So luckily something in me dug deep, and I didn't flee home because of how hard it had all been. But I found just so much comfort and this amazing community, and the women that I trained with. Not many of them have gone on to become doulas. I think it was it was a really interesting mix. Some were mums, some were, one was a woman from Japan, and she really wanted to have a baby. And at the point of us being in the course, she unfortunately was going through, different fertility options. And it was a really beautiful mishmash of
interesting
humans.
mix of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
so that was you studying both birth doula and postpartum doulaing?
Yes, at the same time.
And naturopathy, at the same time.
And naturopathy.
She's a manifesting generator. That's why.
She has
Classic
to do all
Manny
the
Jen.
things.
I was potentially trying to run away from certain problems at the time. But it manifested in a positive thing. I went to drugs and booze in the past, and this was a positive
And this was,
outcome.
the complete opposite.
Exactly. So I loved it. I think it just fueled me, and it was so good. Like I trained for 6 months. It was a different setup at the time then. We did every second week. We met up on a Thursday at this beautiful shiatsu clinic in Brunswick, and it was in person prior to COVID. And by June, I was sort of attending. My best friend, Amy, who I lived with, she was due with her baby in September. So she was my first birth, which was amazing, incredible and complex. She was diagnosed in about mid-pregnancy that her bub would have gastroschisis. So basically where the bowels are born on the outside of the body, there's not a full closure of the stomach before the baby's fully grown in the womb. So, the labour, luckily she was able to labour, and they sort of allowed her to labour, and she birthed vaginally. after a long but, pretty straightforward labour. But immediately Edie, she was born. You could see all of her bowels on the outside of her body. She was wrapped up in like medical cling wrap, taken into a humidity crib and immediately taken to the children's hospital. So, a pretty complex.
Yeah, what a first birth for you.
Yeah, it was big. It was incredible to witness Amy labour and see that whole process unfold, and she managed to have that incredible birth, which I think she'd been scared would be taken away from her amongst all of the stress of the complexity of Edie's health issues. But yeah, she then spent the next 10 months at the Children's Hospital. Wow. So we were young, we were in our mid-20s at the time, and it's pretty crazy to look back and think what unfolded, but I feel like I learnt so much, and I immediately saw what can unfold in quite a complex birth situation, and also gained a lot of respect and reverence immediately. I think that's something a lot of doulas obviously come into the space quite often from a place of having had a traumatic birth in the past themselves, and I've stepped into this space having not birthed myself, a live baby, but I was able to see how incredible the medical side of it can be.
Yeah.
Which was incredible. And the second birth I actually supported was through Birth for Humankind. They actually had like an overflow of clients at the time, and so reached out to the Australian Doula College, and I was connected with a really beautiful Ethiopian woman. Her and her partner lived here, and actually some of her family lived here, which was really great. So she did have support in that sense. They all came into the birth suite when the labour was happening.
Oh, my goodness.
Pre-COVID, there was like 8 cousins and bouncing birth balls across the room. It was really special. But helping her navigate the medical system as someone with English as their second language was huge. Like I had to quickly learn and study a lot. But that was really amazing. So was with her through her labour. She had cholestasis in late pregnancy.
What is that?
It's basically like major itching of the skin, like potentially driven by like hormones and a bit of liver dysfunction later in pregnancy. But it's basically like you feel like you want to crawl out of your skin. Yeah,
How horrible.
Yeah, and it can really impact. It can impact the baby's health, your own health. So it involves an induction. So second labour was an induction, ended up being a really beautiful birth in the end as well, but I sort of saw that as my second birth. And then my third student birth was a cesarean. So I saw it all.
My God, you really did, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. It was, it was incredibly eye-opening, but it really made me love supporting people in hospital. Yeah, which I think, there can be a big divide in the doula world about whether people do want to just support home birth, maybe because they've been born at home themselves or had a really traumatic experience in the hospital. But I've kind of felt for myself personally, just because of that experience and seeing how much support people need in just feeling really safe and comfortable about what time they should go into the hospital, or, if it's really busy and their midwives are sort of in and out, or their obstetrician hasn't arrived, how I can be there as that kind of continuity, physical support, which really helps out the medical staff. I know a lot of them appreciate it, our presence being there, not always, but there's a lot of reverence, I think, and shared appreciation.
I think if I had another baby, that I would definitely have a birth doula for all of those reasons that you just said. Whether I decided to be in hospital or at home, my first instinct is I would probably still have it in hospital, but the care team around me would look very different. But
totally.
just all of those, knowing that I would have that person there as that solid, that anchor point for everything.
Yeah.
I think, I agree with you. I think if you can have a birth doula in the hospital, that would just be everything, really.
It's the dream. Like if
you
you
really
can
need someone to advocate for you.
Yeah.
In the hospital.
I think that's so important.
And I think it's, I get to be there in these people's homes. People reach out to me sometimes at 6 weeks, into their pregnancy. Some reach out to me at 30 weeks into their pregnancy. So different people have different priorities and their knowledge. Some people don't even find out about what a doula is until they're way into their 3rd trimester. But we get to come, and I guess that's so lovely. And what kind of got me into the work initially was that I get to go to their home and I get to kind of get to know their partner and their children if they already have them, and we can discuss all the conversations they've had with the variety of health, providers and practitioners that have looked after them. We can sit down and really talk about the statistics and information for all of the different interventions that might come up or any potential health concerns. And we've actually got the time. Like, I'll go over to their house and we'll have 2 or 3 hours to sit down and talk about things. Whereas,
yeah, because I imagine in, an obstetrician appointment, it's just like, well, this is what can go wrong and this is the intervention that'll happen, but then it sort of doesn't go beyond that. I'm sure there are OBs that, give that time, definitely. But to have that time to sit down and go through, that would be such an empowering process as well, to advocate for yourself in those environments.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And, as doulas, we don't act medically. We don't do anything from that perspective. So I'll always refer my clients back to go and speak to their OB or their midwife. But it's like, go back with questions. It's sort of like, how can we pull this apart incredibly and use like the BRAIN acronym where you're asking for the benefits and the risks and just things that get bypassed so easily when you have literally 10 minutes. And it's like, literally do an ultrasound, monitor baby, all looking well. And I just know so many mums walk away from that and they're like, there's so much more I didn't quite know. And like, when can I actually ask about the, glucose tolerance test and alternatives to it and group B strep? And there's just so many clients of mine as well. In my naturopathy consults, we sort of talk about it, and it's not until we have a conversation where I ask, have you heard about this? Have you spoken about it with your midwife yet, or obstetrician? And they sort of say, oh, no, I've never really heard of it. So it's really nice for a doula to just have that space and time to connect, information-wise, but also emotionally. So you feel so safe and like you've gotten to know them by the time you go into the hospital, especially for people birthing in public systems where they haven't been able to get into a continuity program.
Yes.
Yeah, so doulas really this is why I just think, like, at a home birth you kind of need a doula. Even if it's not an official doula, you need as many helping hands as possible. Yeah. So if it's not a doula, it's your mum, your sister, your best friend, whatever. But in hospital settings, my goodness, you really need a doula to get the outcome you're hoping for.
Definitely. I think, there's different situations that arise, but I was with my best friend at one of my best friends at her labour late last year, October, and it was a case of, getting to the hospital when she was in well-established labour, and they were actually so busy at the time. They were understaffed. It was a Sunday night.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this.
Yeah, and it was sort of late on the Sunday evening. There weren't enough cleaners, so the rooms weren't getting changed over quickly enough, and so there just wasn't enough space for her to go up into a birth suite. And so we were put into a side room, and like, no midwife or anyone is going to have the time, in that situation when they're so busy to come in and check on her. And I think when you have that lack of presence, and her partner, we'd gone through a lot, but it was his first time obviously seeing someone he loves in clear discomfort going through this. He was kind of freaking out a bit, wondering if we should go up to the birth suite, and I was like, it's okay, like, let's just go into an assessment room. They said they'd be there in like 20 minutes. 3 hours later, someone came in to check. So they'd obviously kind of triaged her and gone, she's well on her way, nothing looks complex, all is well. But in that situation, I think they would have just sat there in the room and probably stressed, and that would have actually caused the tension in her body and potentially pain to exacerbate.
Yes.
And you can just see where it would have become really
a snowball effect.
Absolutely.
Of everything.
Yeah. And she hadn't had any vaginal examinations at the point when we arrived. And the first thing I guess that they were going to potentially offer was that, just to see where she's at so they could triage her. So them knowing I was there, I think gave them a bit of comfort that she was looked after. I just threw her in the shower in the dark. She laboured in there incredibly for 2 or 3 hours until they came in. And by that point, there was a room available, and everyone just looked at her like the midwives saw her and were like, oh my God, she's so on her way. She's labouring incredibly, and she pushed the baby out within like an hour of us getting into that room finally. So, not having the
support of you could have been
my support,
very, very different.
Definitely. But also like the hospital policy of just like woman arrives, we don't know where she's at, vaginal examination, stuff like that can really shift and change the trajectory of the labour. And I, like my friend had said, I'm totally open to it and that's great. But I could just see that she didn't need it necessarily. Like there's so many other things that you can try. And a lot of the time the hospital staff just don't have the time or the resources to sit there with them and do belly jiggling or hip squeezes and pop them in the shower and make sure the music's right and the light's right. Like that's not happening. So that's where doulas can really come in and like create an environment that feels incredibly nurturing and safe.
Conducive to the process of how it can be calm and patient and
Exactly.
Oh my God. So how many years does that put you of being a doula then?
Since I'm coming up to 9 years.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, which has been incredible. And I didn't do a lot of postpartum when I started. It was a birth and postnatal course, but it took me until I'd really finished uni, which is wild because I was doing uni. We'd started Mama Goodness towards the end of uni. I was on call, going to births overnight. Luckily, a lot of my lecturers and tutors at uni kind of saw the whole trajectory of everything and were like, all good. Like if I missed a clinic, I don't know how I got away with it, but sweet talked them. But it was, amazing. So when I finally finished uni and with Mama Goodness, I sort of needed a bit more structure in my days, probably at the end of studying for upward of 8 or 9 years. I just was feeling a little bit burnt out from that overnight whole process being on call.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's a good thing about being a maiden. It's like I'm actually one of the doulas out there that have the time and energy reserves. I don't have a family at home. I don't have kids that need me. Like I take my absolute hat off. I don't understand how some of the birth doulas I know do it. They've got incredible support and energy and systems in place for themselves. But I really delved into postnatal and postpartum doulaing probably around 2019.
Yeah, right.
Which was really great. And I'd sort of weave in packages where I'd create them where I would be their birth doula and then their postpartum doula. So it's been really nice to flip between it and that's so great. I know some people do both. It's becoming a bit rarer and rarer.
People tend to either want to focus on birth or focus on postpartum.
Yes. Yeah. I think maybe because of my naturopathy work where I see people for fertility, like hormonal concerns or general health concerns in the lead up to them wanting to conceive, and then I'm the naturopath through their pregnancy. I just love the continuity across the whole spectrum. It's my complete bread and butter.
Do we want to talk about, I mean, we because we're talking about your story, we touched on, I mean, you mentioned Mama Goodness. We don't really need to talk about Mama Goodness.
Yes, we
I mean,
do.
we can, do we? We can. It's so boring.
Our baby.
Our baby, and then life after birth, and then here we are.
Yeah.
So
it feels like a very short space of time within which all of that happened as well.
It did, yeah. It was basically Jess and I connected. I'd followed you on Instagram for years and I'd seen you were in Crete where my family live, and I
still remember getting the message from you and being like, because your profile was private, I was like, I couldn't gauge whether you were cool or stalkerish. Lucky
bit of column A, column B.
Lucky I was so desperate for
friends.
For a naturopath. I came and saw you in your clinic. Remember?
You did, exactly. So you moved back to Australia. You were pregnant with Jude. I was still in clinic. And I think because of my doula work and spruiking it on my Instagram, people started to come and see me to support them through their pregnancy. And Jess showed up one day, which was really cute. So I prescribed you a couple of different supplements, and then basically what was to be the first product that would be our Zen drops for Mama Goodness, which are like flower essence drops.
Oh.
So like the bark flowers, the emergency essence, those kind of things. This was basically one that I'd put together to support Jess through
the specific needs of a
moment.
Although I have to say, when Vaughne made me that, I was like, oh, that's nice, but I'm not going to need it because, I mean, you know my story. After I had Louis, I was cool as a cucumber. I was fine. I couldn't imagine being flustered or overwhelmed or anything like that. And my God, trying to feed Jude with my oversupply and my bleeding nipples because they were so rock hard, and having Louis climbing on me, I wanted to scream. The Zen drops were so helpful.
I told you.
So she knew what she was doing.
Totally.
Yeah. So then when I had the idea of doing a meal delivery for new mums, and I just was like, I had that flash in my mind one day, you've got to do it with Vaughne. Because at first I thought I should get her to make some of those drops. I'm going to call them Zen drops, and I want every birthing person on the planet to have access to these because they're so amazing. And then you were like, well, I've had the same idea. And we were like, let's do it together.
Oh, totally. It was really cool because I'd seen Mother Bees over in LA, like Hang Hours food delivery service. So the naturopath in me understood how much nutrition can set a mum up to thrive, and how it could completely, a lack of could completely impede her well-being in the postpartum and pregnancy, and well beyond early postpartum. So that idea had bubbled away. I'd seen that on Instagram, and when you came to me, it was like, all right, now we just need to tick things off.
Yeah.
I just need to finish this degree, need to go to Japan.
That's right. Yeah.
And then come back. And so, yeah, we were basically in mad planning mode until September of 2019. So I'd graduated in May, and then in September we launched Mama Goodness, which
is so short. Like when I look at home and the way you're doing things, Larissa, and how thorough everything is, and the manuals we've been writing, and the hoops you've had to jump through for you do love a manual.
Everyone's going to have manual trauma.
I'm midway through writing 5 different manuals at the moment.
Yeah.
But look, a lot of our groundwork was done while I was breastfeeding Jude.
Totally.
So lucky to have iPhones in this day and age.
Yeah.
So, all the research about what we would package things into and all of that was done then. But we really, 4 months is not long to have a business idea and then launch a business. We just went in guns blazing.
We went in flying by the seat of our pants a little bit.
Naively.
No workbooks or manuals.
No manuals.
No manuals, but we built it, over the course. And then, of course, COVID hit in March 2020. So kind of 6 months.
But you also broke your ankle.
Oh, I broke my ankle at the end of 2019. That was great. So I was crutching around. Jess was doing deliveries. Like, thank God we'd only just started this, and we were having 6-10 deliveries around Melbourne of a week. But come COVID, also thank God that we had done a meal delivery service instead of a bricks and mortar store or anything like that, because the hospitality industry was completely rolled through that entire time. But it was like, I honestly feel like it was a lifesaver for my mental health during that time.
Oh my gosh, well, we got to go to work. We got to see each other. So many people never got to see, like Andy was at home with the kids and didn't have contact with another adult human except me for months.
So did Mama Goodness at that point kind of blow up through COVID? Because obviously
we were that bridge between people being able to visit there. Like there were doula clients of mine that I just wrote myself one of those travel passes for, who didn't see a single midwife, literally gave birth. I think my client gave birth on the 6th of March, and she was in the postpartum, and I lived in Northcote at the time and was travelling down towards Frankston Way. But she didn't see anyone for it was her first baby for the first 8 weeks of her baby's life. She was at home alone. Her partner worked in construction, so he was out of the house all day. And I was like, there's no way in hell that you're going to sit there in your house alone in this time. So it was fueled by that kind of knowing how much women were struggling. Like I took her to one of her maternal checkups. Actually, it was her 6-week checkup, and a nurse came out to the car and talked to her, and then she literally had to just go in for a second. No physical assessment, like none of that traditional care. So she was looking down the barrel of a postpartum that had started off incredibly lacking in any continuity.
Disconnected and lonely.
Yeah, exactly. And, learning how to breastfeed without anyone coming in and actually physically showing you how to latch baby. I remember she had thrush on her nipples and on her tongue, and it was just like all of these things. So trying to look after people in that sense, but just I think us knowing that there were so many new mums and families out there that were in a similar situation and had family overseas and were not going to see their family for the foreseeable future. So we could bring good quality, nutrient-rich, beautiful food. And like the notes that people would write, they could write a little love note.
So we would
We would
crying.
cry. Yeah.
Because we would handwrite all these notes. So someone would buy a pack for a sister or a best friend or a daughter.
The grandpa.
The grandpa. Oh my gosh, his grandpa. It
don't.
was multiple,
was-
at like I would say 9 or 10 packs for his granddaughter. And every time it would say love
For his
granddad.
granddaughter.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It would say it
stop
so
And we were
it.
just, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. We felt so lucky to be.
and
that-
facilitating
Yeah.
that. Like it was, if we could be the vessel, it was incredible that we could do that for people. So, and I think with that, it was just people didn't have much to do. They were sitting at home on Instagram, eating some food,
Yeah,
wanting to send a gift. And so Mama Goodness grew, and we were so lucky. I think the timing of it all couldn't have been better.
Yeah.
There wasn't any other food delivery service like it in Melbourne as well. That was
Yeah, we were the only
specifically
one at that time.
Yeah. Naomi was in Sydney, was the first in Australia, but it was sort of a time when you could get, HelloFresh and all of that, but that's
Yes.
not what
But
new
not
mums need.
postpartum rich.
And
Exactly.
not
Yeah.
ready made. With HelloFresh, you still have to cook. So this was like the only.
Yeah, it was done.
Yeah.
ready to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the world opened back up, and we
Yes.
realized
Oh, and we were
we'd bitten
3
off
years
way more
in.
way more than we could chew, and we were writing a book.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was
It
just
was-
too much.
Let's not relive the trauma, ladies.
No.
On that note, thank you so much, Vaughne.
Pleasure.
You're going to hang around and we're going to keep chatting about all things naturopathy, postpartum. So, yeah, thank you.
Excited. Thank you. Talk soon.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.